Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here at our weekly Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m. Tanya Shir. We are studying, this is the fourth Tanya Shir in our series. We're studying the Alter Rebbe's introduction to Tanya, called Hakdmas Hamalaket, the introduction of the collector, the Alter Rebbe referring to himself as the collector, as if to say that there's nothing novel in Tanya. It's just a collection of ideas that he learned from his teachers, mipi Sforim and mipi Seifrim, from teachers and books. The Alter Rebbe writes his own introduction to the Sefer Tanya, and this is the introduction that we are studying. I have muted you all for the course of this year, but there is a chat box at the bottom of your screen, and if anybody would like to ask questions or contribute something while we're studying, please feel free to add it to the chat box. And Be'ezus Hashem, we'll do our best to address it. Okay. The Alter Rebbe's introduction to Tanya addresses his motivation for writing Tanya. What was it that he wanted to accomplish and contribute with this Tanya? And the claim he makes, the argument, so to speak, the Alter Rebbe makes in the purpose of the writing of the Tanya, discussed again at great length here in the Hakdama, in the Alter Rebbe's introduction. The claim that Alter Rebbe makes is actually incredibly mind-boggling. It's really staggering if you think about it. The Alter Rebbe says that the Tanya comes to address the following challenge. Alter Rebbe himself is, of course, a Rebbe. It doesn't say it in those words, but this is the situation. He's a Rebbe, which means he has thousands upon thousands of Hasidim, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Hasidim over the course of the year since then. Many millions of Hasidim. All of these Hasidim, all of us, that is, we all have questions. Many questions, intellectual questions, emotional questions, things that perturb us at times. Of course, we're not just talking here about questions where we seek, we're not just talking about questions where we seek certain elements of information. We're talking about real life quandaries in spiritual matters, in Avodas Hashem. The Alter Rebbe has the answers. How does one person answer so many people's questions? And again, bearing in mind, these questions are complicated and they're very charged. They're layered psychologically, intellectually, emotionally. These are, real life quandaries. And now you have a situation where one man, the Alter Rebbe, has the answers. So how do we do this exchange? How do we get one man, one individual, to provide answers to so many questioners? Until the writing of the Tanya, the only solution that was used was called Yechidus. Yechidus meant that individuals with these questions and challenges would go into the Alter Rebbe and talk to him privately. There they would be free, they would be allowed to air out their concerns, to air out their issues. The Alter Rebbe would listen, absorb. The Alter Rebbe would respond, guide them, and provide answers to the questions. There were two problems the Alter Rebbe articulates here in Hakdmas Hamalaket. There are two problems with this system. Number one, it's incredibly time-consuming. Ein hazman grome. It's incredibly time-consuming. That is, for the Alter Rebbe himself to be able to have the time. There's 24 hours in a day to sit with each person. Time constraints make it very difficult, if even possible, to spend that much time with each person on a personal level. The second problem the Alter Rebbe articulates is that people who came into him, Hasidim who came into him, and would have these conversations, it was common that they would forget what the Alter Rebbe had taught them. I mean, to me, this is incredible. But this is what Alter Rebbe writes. I think it needs some explanation, but this is what Alter Rebbe says. It was common that they would forget what he told them. So even if there was time, in theory, to sit with every person and answer all their questions, even that wouldn't be enough, because people often forget what Alter Rebbe told them, which means they'd have to come back and hear it again. Once again, putting more pressure on the time constraints and challenging really significantly the effectiveness of the system. The solution to this is to write a sefer, to write the Tanya, in which in this Sefer HaTanya is articulated all of the answers to all of these questions. The Alter Rebbe will go so far as to say that the Tanya provides all the answers to all the questions, and one who studies it will find mergoya lenafsha. Will find not just answers, but they'll find mergoya is tranquility. Studying Tanya is supposed to bring a person's spiritual tranquility, and the correct counsel for all matters that are difficult in avodas Hashem. On the other hand, it's difficult to understand how the book, how a sefer, any sefer, can take the place of Yechidus. After all, the Alter Rebbe argues, this is how he begins the entire introduction. How can studying a sefer take the place of having a conversation with a Rebbe? After all, when you study a sefer, when you read from a sefer, you're doing all the work on your own. You have the book, you have the sefer in front of you, but you got to do all the lifting on your own. Nobody's assisting you, or at least you're not being assisted as powerfully as you would be when you're having a conversation with a Rebbe. You got to do the work on your own. Okay, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is, quote, im sichloi v'daitoi mivulvolim, if a person is in a state of confusion, ubachashecha yisalochu, and walking in darkness, then on their own from the Sefer, they're not going to be able to heal themselves. Even if the Sefer does have the solutions to their problems, even if the Sefer does have tailor-made solutions to their problems. But not having somebody articulate the solutions to you puts you in a position where you have to extract the solutions from the Sefer on your own, puts you in a position where you have to, so to speak, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, or liberate yourself from prison with your hands tied. If you're in a state, the Alter Rebbe asks us, if you're in a state of confusion and walking in darkness, how are you, while you're in a state of confusion, going to be able to read from the Sefer and find the solutions and be able to apply them to yourself? How are you going to do that? If you're in conversation with a Rebbe in Yechidus, then the Rebbe can, so to speak, schlep you out. He can. The force of the force of the person behind the Sefer, the force of the Rebbe can lift you up. But if you're on your own and you're in darkness, then you're stuck. Seems difficult. Alter Rebbe asks this question. Seems difficult to understand how a person who's in a state of confusion and darkness, through reading a sefer that has the solution, will be able to heal themselves or figure out the solution if they themselves are in darkness. Okay. Before I move on, I just want to share with you a story. A couple of years ago, Rabbi Leibel Groner, may his soul have an illuminated Gan Eden, and was here in Los Angeles, and he was farbrengen with us. It was a very special farbrengen. He farbrenged for many hours, and he told many fascinating stories. So one of the stories that he related was about a part. Rabbi Leibel Groner, of course, was one of the Lubavitch Rebbe secretaries, and one of the not so pleasant parts of his job was that every now and then he would have to remind people during the time when the Rebbe did see people for Yechidus, when the Rebbe did see people in private audience, every now and then he'd have to remind people that they were taking too much of the Rebbe's time, and that they needed to be sensitive to the hundreds and sometimes thousands of others who wanted to speak to the Rebbe. Even to the point that he'd have to sometimes he'd have to walk into the room and interrupt conversations with people who were talking to the Rebbe and say, look, I'm really sorry, but you've been here, for X amount of time, and it's time to move on. He spoke about it. He said it was a very unpleasant part of his job, but it's what he had to do. So he said that there was once somebody, of course he didn't tell us who or any of the details, but he said there was once somebody who went in to see the Rebbe privately for Yechidus, and while the person was in the Rebbe's room, somehow Rabbi Leibel Groner becomes aware that this person is telling the Rebbe a particular story or sharing a particular challenge or question. And although the Rebbe had already responded and given him a bracha and a solution and an eitz and all the rest of it, the person insisted on repeating the story, repeating the question, whatever it was. They were standing in the Rebbe's room and they were repeating themselves. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever had this experience in dealing with people, but people sometimes do this, right? They'll ask you a question, you'll give them an answer, and they repeat the question. They'll tell you a story, you'll empathize, you'll communicate a deep understanding, and they repeat themselves. They just say it again. And there's all sorts of reasons, as you'll see from the stories, all sorts of reasons why people do that. But this was happening in the Rebbe's room, and Rabbi Groner felt that he couldn't let this go on. It was part of his job description to tell the person, look, you've asked your question, you've told your story, you've shared your concern, the Rebbe's responded, he's blessed you, he's counseled you, you got to move on. There's so many other people. So Rabbi Groner walked in and he told the person, look, I'm really sorry, the Rebbe's very busy, and Rabbi Groner saw to it that the Yechidus come to an end and the individual left. Later that night, the Rebbe spoke to Rabbi Groner, and he told Rabbi Groner that he wants Rabbi Groner to understand. The Rebbe said, I want you, Rabbi Groner, to understand why sometimes people repeat themselves. To me, the Rebbe said, when they talk to me, why they repeat themselves. He said, Rebbe said, I just want you to understand why they do it. He said it in Yiddish, so I'll say it the way I remember Rabbi Groner saying in Yiddish, and then I'll try to translate. He said like this, he said, "Bekommt rein mit steiner affen Herzen." People come in, people have challenges in life. The challenges can be compared to rocks on a person's heart. A person goes through life carrying baggage, carrying challenges, carrying pain. So it can be compared to like rocks. People like to call it luggage or baggage. The Rebbe referred to it as boulders on one's heart. The Rebbe said, "Jeder Mal, was sie erzählen de Meise, fällt herab von sie ein Stein von Herzen." Every time that they repeat their story to me, one rock, one boulder falls off their heart. So if they have many boulders, if they have many rocks, they need to tell the story a few times in order to rid themselves of the rocks from their heart. That's what the Rebbe said. Meaning to say, it's true that they're just repeating themselves. From a technical perspective, it's just the same thing over and over again. But let's call it from an emotional perspective. Every time they repeat the story, every time they can repeat the story to the Rebbe directly, they feel an element of relief. Relief is layered. You can get superficial relief, you can get deeper relief. And it exists on many levels. And the Rebbe was basically saying, there actually isn't another way for them to experience this type of deep relief that they crave other than repeating the story the same time, repeating the same story over and over again. So he was basically telling Rabbi Groner to be compassionate or more understanding with the repetitiveness of people. Basically, the Rebbe was saying, sometimes a person just needs the time to stand there and say the same thing, over and over again. Why am I saying this? There's a similar point here to what Alter Rebbe is saying in Tanya, to what Alter Rebbe is explaining with regard to the challenge of Tanya. When a person stands in front of his Rebbe and he articulates his problems, whatever it is, his challenges, to his Rebbe, there's a sense that he feels that his Rebbe is understanding, and therefore his Rebbe is with him. There's a sense the Chassid has that he's not wrestling with this problem alone. He has his Rebbe's help and support. Let's call it even on an emotional or spiritual level, not just from a technical level. This empowers the Chassid, let's again, to believe in themselves in ways that they otherwise wouldn't. So it seems, Alter Rebbe is saying, it seems like there's no replacement for this. What are you going to give a guy a book? Imagine you come to somebody with real, genuine challenges in life and they hand you a book, right? I wrote a book on this issue. Here it is. Okay. I didn't need to come to you to read a book. I can buy it on Amazon. I came to you because I need the interaction, the exchange. That sense of connection between a Rebbe and a Chassid, it seems like that's not something you can get from a Sefer. Again, even if the sefer that you're reading has the very specific solution to the very specific problem that you're going through. The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, had an older brother. His name was Zalman Aaron. They called him the Razah, which was an acronym for his name, Zalman Aaron. So the Rebbe brings that when they were children, the Rebbe Rashab and the Razah, when they were children, they were playing. They played a game. What was the game that the Rebbe Rashab played with his older brother, the Razah, when they were children? They played a game called Rebbe and Chassid. Because children enact what they experience. So since their father was the Rebbe Marash, their grandfather was the Tzemach Tzedek, they grew up in children of Rebbes, grandchildren of children of a Rebbe, grandchildren of a Rebbe. So this is what they played as children. All right? So when you play Rebbe and Chassid, what do you play? What do you play? So one took on the job of a Rebbe, the other one took on the role of Rebbe, the other one took on the role of a Chassid, and they played Yechidus. The Rebbe relates the story. The Rebbe Rashab was the younger brother, played the role of Chassid. The older brother, the Razah, played the role of Rebbe. As children. If I remember correctly, I think they were around 5 or 6 years old, somewhere around there. No, so the Razah, the one playing Rebbe, puts on a hat and a gartel of some form. His younger brother, the Rebbe Rashab, also gets dressed up as a Chassid does. And they reenact the scene as children. With the younger one, the Rebbe Rashab, who would later grow up to be the Rebbe Rashab, goes into his older brother as a Chassid does to his Rebbe in Yechidus. In this Yechidus, the Rebbe Rashab told his older brother that he became aware of something that he had done that was not 100% in accordance with halacha. And he was asking, as a Chassid asks his Rebbe, he was asking his Rebbe for a tikkun, some way to fix this. What did he do wrong? He ate a certain type of walnut, a certain type of nut on Shabbos. And after he eaten this type of nut on Shabbos, he became aware that in the back of the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe writes that one should not eat these types of nuts on Shabbos. Why not? First of all, the shells immediately become muktzah. And second of all, because the nuts have certain membrane layers that are not edible, and a person may, chas v'sholem, inadvertently end up doing boirer. They may remove some of these membrane layers or shells, remove them from the edible nuts, and this is called removing psoilos mitoich oichel, removing bad from good, which is not allowed, even in certain circumstances, anisur dairaisa. And so to avoid these complications, the person shouldn't eat these nuts on Shabbos. He didn't know. The Rebbe Rashab said he was very concerned with this. He didn't know at the time that he ate the nuts that the Alter Rebbe writes this. So he ate the nuts on Shabbos. It's not brought down in Shulchan Aruch anywhere that you shouldn't eat these nuts on Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe writes it at the back of Siddur. So b'meila, as a child, the Rebbe Rashab said to his brother, I'm asking for a tikkun for eating these nuts despite the fact, because I didn't know that the Alter Rebbe, of course, their great-grandfather, writes in the back of Siddur not to eat it. The Razah, playing the role of Rebbe, gave the Rebbe Rashab a tikkun. He told him that from then on, he should be careful, when he davens, he should be careful to look inside the Siddur, to pay close attention, to read the words from inside the Siddur, and to think Pirush HaMilos, to think the meaning of the words. He shouldn't just say the words, he should think about what the words mean, and he should give tzedakah before davening. 3 things. Look inside a Siddur, think about the meaning of the words, and to give tzedakah before davening. And the Rebbe writes, the Rebbe told the story. The Rebbe says that as soon as the Razah told the Rebbe Rashab this, open your hearts, my friends. The Rebbe Rashab, the younger brother playing Chassid, told his older brother, the Razah, you're not a good Rebbe. And you never will be a Rebbe. He called foul in the game. Why not, said the Razah. What did I do wrong? I feel like I gave you an excellent tikkun. The kind of tikkun, by the way, that a Rebbe would give his chassid. Pay attention when you daven, look inside the Siddur, think about what the words mean, give tzedakah before. What's wrong with that? The Rebbe Rashab said, the problem is not what you said. The problem is and the problem is not what you did. The problem is what you didn't say and what you didn't do. What didn't I say? What didn't I do? They spoke in Yiddish. He said, "Dus nicht gegeben a krechts." You didn't give a sigh. You didn't give a moan. You didn't go, ah. Before a Rebbe responds, he has to say, ah. What's ah? Before a Rebbe responds, he has to show the chassid. He has to empathize, in English it's called. He has to communicate a deep empathy. He has to tell the chassid, I feel your pain. Ah! Es tut weh. If this bothers you to the extent that you're coming into Yechidus to talk to me about it, I'm here, I'm with you, I feel your pain. What did I do, said the Rebbe Rashab? I came into you with a question. You gave me an answer. There's an expression in Yiddish. Ich frag dir a kasha und du gibst mir a teretz. I'm asking you a question, you give me an answer. I ask you for answers. Of course I ask you for answers. But before you give me an answer, show me that you're there. I want to connect with you. You want to be a Rebbe, look the chassid in the face and communicate to them that you feel that you're alive. A book can never do that. Or at least so it's the Alter Rebbe's question. How's a book going to do that? Even if the answer is the right answer for the chassid. Again, in this story, the Rebbe Rashab didn't say you gave me the wrong answer. You gave me the right answer, but you didn't do it as a Rebbe does. And yet the Alter Rebbe doubles down. No, says the Alter Rebbe, the Tanya is, in the end, the Alter Rebbe will argue that the Tanya is the solution. The Tanya can accomplish this, and I see this very powerfully. In later, the Alter Rebbe will say, again, we'll get there. Later, the Alter Rebbe will say, Tanya is not just the Eitzah. Tanya is not just the book with solutions. It's mirgoya lenafsha. It's tranquility for the soul. Studying it is tranquility for the soul. Okay. How can the Tanya possibly accomplish this? This is where we're up to. I'm going to continue learning a little bit from inside the text. If you have a lessons in Tanya, I'm on page 19, Ubarmin, by the words Ubarmin Dain. Ubarmin Dain, says the Alter Rebbe, in addition to this, in addition to the question, how can we compare studying Tanya to talk to a Rebbe? How can we compare talking to a person, not just a person, talking to a Rebbe? Just studying from a sefer. When I study from a sefer, I'm alone. It's just me. And if I'm in darkness, then I remain in darkness. How can you compare that to having a conversation with an actual Rebbe? Bar Midah, there's another problem. The other problem is, what are the chances that the sefer is going to be able to address the exact specific problem that the person is encountering when they pick up the sefer? The sefer doesn't have or at least so it would seem, the sefer doesn't have a mind of its own. When you go into a Rebbe and you talk to them, the Rebbe can hear your question and tailor their response to your question. But when you're just reading from a sefer, it's just a sefer. So again, besides for the fact that even if the sefer was written for your specific challenge with a specific response, the original initial question is, but it's still just the sefer. Where's the krechts? Where's the connection? Where's the Rebbe to help me? Says the Alter Rebbe, that's a problem even if the sefer has the specific response to your specific question. I mean, Bar Midah, besides for that, in general, it's not possible, or at least again, so it would seem, it's not possible for one sefer to address every person's specific concern and question and dilemma and cause for anxiety in Avodas Hashem, and give them the answer that they need to hear on an individual level. One sefer should do that for everybody. What kind of an assertion is that? I mean, then besides for the fact that the sefer doesn't seem to have the Rebbe Chassid connection, Hine Sifrei Ayir Habnoim Al Pi Seichel Anushi Bevadai Einon Shavin L'Chol Nefesh. Certainly, any sefer which is written, Sifrei Ayira means sforim that are written to inspire people in Avodas Hashem, to again, like we're talking, to provide guidance and tranquility and counsel and clarity and reassurance, etc. So if these sforim are built, any sefer of this nature, which is built al b'seichel anushi, which is written in a way that communicates to a person on a human level, with logical arguments, with human written with human compassion and the human connection. There's no chance that a sefer like that can be available, can be a solution for everybody equally. Because, surprise, surprise, everybody is different, and everybody thinks different, and everybody's mind is different. And what is a solution for one person can be a problem for a different person. And what works for one doesn't work for another. The same thought that for one person can be inspiring and illuminating and life-changing and resonate significantly in a deep level and change their lives. For another person, the same idea, again, if it's seichel anushi, if it's just human intellect, for another person can be meaningless. Nothing. Two people hear the same idea. Two people hear the same story. Two people hear the same speech. One person says, wow, that speech changed my life. Never be the same. Started me off on a path of tshuva. There was my life before this speech, before this shiur, before this experience. There was my life after. I heard something and it resonated with me on such a level that I was never the same after that. And the other person who sits through the same shiur and the same experience and the same ideas and jokes and stories says, I feel and I hear nothing. It means nothing to me. Who is telling the truth? Is this an inspirational idea? Is it a life-transforming shiur? Is it or isn't it? The answer is yes. Depends. Some people respond to certain things, other people don't. Ein seichel adam zeh mispol u'misoyer mashu mispol u'misoyer seichel chaveirei. K'moi she'omer Rabbi Seinu zechronim levrocha, as our rabbis teach us, gabe birchas chacham harozim al shishim riboy miYisrael she'ein do yesayim doimai zu lezu v'chulu. So the Gemara, Masechta Brachas, Alter Rebbe quotes, the Gemara talks about also Masechta Brachas, all sorts of different brachas you make. There's a bracha to make when it lightens. There's a bracha to make when it thunders. There's a bracha to make when you see a rainbow. There's a bracha to make when you see a monkey. There's a bracha to make when you see a place which you once had a miracle. There's a bracha to make when you see a place that your ancestors had miracles there. There's a bracha to make, all sorts of brachas. Says the Gemara, there's a bracha you make if you ever have the experience, the opportunity to be in the presence in one place with 600,000 Jews, right? Like the number the Torah gives for the Yidden who left Mitzrayim, between 20 and 60. There's a special bracha to make. What's the bracha you make? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, chacham harozim. What's the meaning of this bracha? Praising Hashem, extolling the virtues of Hashem, that Hashem is chacham harozim. What's chacham harozim? Wise in secret. There's wisdom that Hashem has. There's wisdom that Hashem has that is a secret to human beings. That Hashem doesn't expose. Hashem doesn't reveal the secret to this. The secret, chacham harozim. It's a hidden chokhmah. When you seek 600,000 Jews, you say the bracha that the Rebbeinu Shalom is chacham harozim. Says the Gemara. What's the meaning of that? What's that supposed to mean? Hashem has chokhmah that is hidden from us. Okay, Hashem always has that chokhmah. Why do you say it's 600,000 Jews? What's it got to do with 600,000? What does that mean? Quote, the bracha is acknowledging she'ein deyosehem doimos zu lezu v'chulu. When you see 600,000 Jews, says the Gemara, you're supposed to be overwhelmed with a sense that only the Rebbeinu Shalom can create so many different types of people, and everybody's different, not just physically different, but their minds work different, and they think different, and each one is unique. The uniqueness of the volume, the sheer volume of 600,000 of these different types of creatures with regard to Yidden is supposed to inspire a person to go, wow, the Rebbeinu Shel Olam Chacham HaRozim. You'll forgive me, there's a very old joke about a guy who once encounters Lahavdil Elef Havdolas, a genie, and the genie tells him, you can have anything you want. And the guy says, the genie says, I'll grant you any wish. And the guy says, I appreciate that. He says, my parents live in Australia, and I live in, Los Angeles. I was wondering if you can build me a highway from Los Angeles to Australia so I can visit my parents, back and forth. I'd like to go there once a month, once every 2-3 months to visit them. I have a wonderful relationship with them, but to travel, to fly, it's such a hassle. I'd like to just be able to drive. Can you build me a highway from Los Angeles to Australia? And again, Lahavdil, it's just a joke, bear with me. And the genie goes, look, do me a favor. Could you ask me for something normal? I mean, what's a cup of highway from here to Australia? I mean, ask me what everybody else asks me for. $1 million, to lose a couple of pounds. But ask me something enormous. A highway from here to Australia. A highway from here to Australia. That was just stupidity. The genie says, can you ask me for something else, not something normal? Guy goes, okay, sure, no problem. He says, listen, I've been married for 25 years. I can't figure my wife out. Could you just educate me, explain to me, sometimes she tells me she wants this, sometimes she tells me she wants that. It's confusing. Help me understand my wife, please. So the genie strokes his beard and the genie goes, tell me, how many lanes do you want in the highway from here to Australia? Do you want a two-lane highway, three-lane highway? What do you want? All right, that's the joke. I'm a Chosson teacher, so these kinds of stories play in my head. But the idea of it is that you can spend your entire life getting to know one person, only to discover 20, 30, 40, God knows how many years later, that you still don't really deeply, fully, actually understand someone else's mind. And that's one person. Says the Gemara, you're standing in the presence of 600,000 people. Raise your eyes to the heavens and say, Rebbeinu Shel Olam, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Chacham HaRozim. How the Rebbeinu Shel Olam is able to do that? Unbelievable. All right. Moshe Kosovo Ramban Zal, Alter Rebbe quotes a Ramban. The Ramban writes, B'Milchames Sham, Pirush HaSifri. Gabe Yeshua, the Ramban writes, on this Gemara, where the Gemara says that you make this bracha, the Ramban quotes a Sifri, Medrash. Gabe Yeshua, the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu, is referred to as Ish Asher Ruach Boy, a man who has spirit in him. This is the lashon of the pasuk. Yeshua is referred to as Ish Asher Ruach Boy, a man with spirit in him. Says the Sifri, quoted by the Ramban in a work called Milchamos on the Gemara. The Ramban, the Sifri says, what does it mean, Ish Asher Ruach Boy? What does it mean that Yeshua has spirit in him? That he has the ability to relate to 600,000 Jews and meet each one in his place. This pasuk is taken when the Rebbeinu Shel Olam told Moshe Rabbeinu to appoint Yeshua as his successor. He said, you know why Yeshua is going to be your successor? Is he the biggest Talmud Chacham? Of course. Is he the biggest tzaddik? Of course. Is he the biggest Bal Ruach HaKodesh and Bal Moifas and the biggest Oyev Yisrael? Absolutely, all of those qualities he had. But that's not the reason. Says the Rebbeinu Shel Olam to Moshe Rabbeinu, why he's going to be your successor. He's going to be your successor because he's Ish Asher Ruach Boy. Says the Sifri, which Ruach is Boy? On a simple level, you think the Ruach of Hashem. No, says the Sifri. When Yeshua looks out at 600,000 Jews, he's able to connect to every single person on their level. The Ramban actually over there in the Gemara goes so far as to say that a tzaddik that has this ability, Isha Sheruach Boy, that has this ability to be able to connect to all 600,000 people, when you see such a tzaddik, you would make the bracha. In other words, the Ramban goes so far as to say there's two scenarios in which you make the bracha. Number one, you make the bracha when you see 600,000 Jews, because you're coming face to face with 600,000 different opinions. But then the Ramban says even more. The Ramban says even a tzaddik who has the ability to connect this to all 600,000, that means the tzaddik contains within himself all 600,000. If you would see such a tzaddik, you would make the bracha on the tzaddik too. Now, the reason why we don't do that, the Ramban explains, in most cases, is because when we see the tzaddik, we don't see that the tzaddik has that ability. So, because we're limited to our own minds. So we're back to square one. We can only make that bracha when we actually see 600,000 Jews. But if you could detect that within the tzaddik, if you could see that in the tzaddik, then you would make the bracha even just on meeting the fact that the tzaddik has this ability. You would make the bracha on seeing the tzaddik himself. Okay. The idea being that this isn't an accident, it isn't, something which is not the way it's supposed to be, that everybody thinks differently and works differently, etc. It's taka supposed to, the Eibishter made it that way. And only the Eibishter, b'chochmai haraz, in his secret wisdom, can understand the wiring and the software programming of every single person. So again, the Alter Rebbe is furthering the argument that it seems preposterous to suggest that you're going to have the one sefer that's going to relate to every single person on their level and give them an answer, not just that will answer their question in theory, but will give them an answer in a way that connects with them, in a way that they feel is talking to them. It would seem difficult to assert that one sefer could do such a thing. Okay. Although a few more lines. And even those forum that are not built, that are not based on human intellect, not built on seichel anushi. They're based on midrashay chachamenu. They're based on midrashim. They're based on the words of Chazal. Asher ruach havaya dibur b'ma malasei l'shoinam, that these forum communicate the word of Hashem. This is Torah. V'iraisa v'kutcha brichu kol achad, and of course Torah and Hashem are one. Chol shishim riboy neshamas klalus Yisrael, and all 600,000 neshamas of Jews. Uproteim, upirtei proteim, and the details, the specific souls. Ad nitzutz kal shebakalim ubchus yorach shebameinu b'nei Yisrael, kulu miskashron v'iraisa hiya makasher seisam lakadosh baruch hu k'noyde b'zayir hakadosh. The Zohar explains that every specific soul connects to Hashem through Torah. So surely, if we're studying Torah, then Torah has the road, Torah has the highway, so to speak, for every Yid to connect with Hashem. Every Jew can find answers for his questions in Torah. Surely, says the Alter Rebbe, correct. So that's true in general. But although the Torah can be broken down into details, and every soul has, the Torah can be broken down into details, and every soul connects to Hashem through a specific part of Torah. Quote, listen to the words, quote, Hare ein kol adam zoiche liyos makir makoymai haproti shebetorah. I think this is another one of the ripping bombshells that the Alter Rebbe drops in the introduction to Tanya. But here it is. The Alter Rebbe says it's true. It's true. Even when it comes to Torah, where the Zohar teaches us that every Jew is connected to Torah, and the Zohar teaches that of course through Torah every Jew connects to Hashem. But Torah is very vast. And every Jew has their specific element, has their specific detail in Torah that they need, that resonates with them, that they need to discover in order for them to connect to Hashem. And quote, Ein kol odam zoicha liyos makir mekoymei haproti shebetorah. Not everybody has the schus to discover their specific chelek in Torah. Don't tell me, says the Alter Rebbe, I'm going to pick up a medrash, or I'm going to pick up a Gemara, or I'm going to pick up some sefer that is the words of Chazal communicated, Beruach HaKodesh, Dvar Avaya Diberbam, Hashem's words speak through them, and the words, Hashem's words are on their tongue, and it's going to necessarily resonate with me. It might not resonate with you. And the Alter Rebbe says it might not resonate with you, and it's not your fault. It might not resonate with you, and it's not your fault. It might not resonate with you because that's not your, quote, chelek in Torah. What is my chelek in Torah? Ein kol adam zoicha liyos makir. Not everybody merits to find out which one is theirs. So again, back to the same question. When you go for yechidus to a tzaddik, the tzaddik sees your neshama, the tzaddik sees your chelek in Torah, the tzaddik can tell you, go and study this section of Torah. This section of Torah connects to your neshama. Through it, you'll connect to Hashem. You'll find the answers and the tranquility for your soul. But when you write a sefer, when you're studying a sefer, what if if the sefer is based on human intellect, then it might not resonate with me at all. It might have nothing to do with me. And even if it's Torah, in which case every part of Torah is connected to every single Jew, says the Alter Rebbe, every part of Torah is connected to every single Jew in general. But specifically, every neshama needs to find its chelek, its part that would provide for it the healing and the tranquility and the guidance. Not everybody merits to find this. I'll just conclude with this. It's known that in the Arizal's shul in Sfas, where the Arizal lived and davened and taught Kabbalah, it's known that the Arizal had a couple of very choshev colleagues in his shul. Right, the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, davened in his shul. Rebbe Moshe Alshich, the famous commentator, the famous Alshich on Torah, davened there. The famous Chazan, Rebbe Shlomo Alkabetz, the author of the Chadoidi, davened there. They all davened in the same shul. It was a shul in Sfas. You can go and visit it. Next time you're in Sfas, look up the Arizal's shul. They all davened in the same shul. The Arizal, the Beis Yosef, Rebbe Shlomo Alkabetz, and the Alshich. No, so how do you have 4 such heavy hitters in one shul? Right? How do you add it? So Beis Yosef was the Rav, Reb Shlomo Alkabetz was the Chazan, Reb Moshe Alshich was the Darshan, and the Arizal would teach Kabbalah. So it's not a very famous story. It's known that the Arizal would teach Kabbalah. Reb Moshe Alshich wrote one of the most famous commentaries on Tanakh. Would sit through the Arizal's Kabbalah shir and fall asleep. Not intentionally, chas v'shalom. He was trying to stay awake. He was trying to learn Kabbalah, but he would sit there and he would fall asleep. And it bothered him tremendously to the extent that he would take a nap before the shir, and he would sit down during the shir and he would still fall asleep. So he went to the Arizal. He said, "What's going on? I'm trying to stay awake through your shir. I push it can't." The Arizal told him, "It's not your fault. Not just it's not your fault." Arizal said, "It's not a bad thing that you're falling asleep through my shir. My shir is not for you," said the Arizal. Why not? Because Torah has 4 levels: Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid. The Alter Rebbe says, "I'm teaching Soid, and your neshama is shayach, belongs to the world of Drush. Your neshama is putting you to sleep during my shir," says the Arizal, because your neshama is trying to tell you this is not your chelek in Torah. It's an unbelievable story. It's brought down a Shivchei Hari, and this is what it says. Meaning, what's relevant here, right? Next time you fall asleep during somebody's shir, you'll tell them, next time you fall asleep when your spouse is talking to you, tell them, "Listen, I would love to stay awake, but it's pashut. My neshama belongs to a different chelek in Torah." No. The idea is, Faket, the reason we're telling you, because your neshama is so sensitive, it knows its shlichus, so the neshama tunes out from this because the neshama knows this stuff doesn't belong to me. So again, the Alter Rebbe furthering the question, sort of digging his deals deeper. Even when you study Torah, even when you study, the original words of Chazal, not necessarily does everybody find their specific chelek in Torah. And if you don't find your chelek in Torah, it wouldn't resonate. It seems like it wouldn't help you, even if the tzaddik himself was explaining. Even if the tzaddik himself was explaining it to you, it still wouldn't work. The job of the tzaddik would be to find which part of Torah does connect with you, that does resonate. How much more so if you have a sefer. And the sefer is, number one, not personal, therefore you got to do all the work on your own. And it's one sefer for so many different people. How can we possibly ascertain? This is the question of Akdom B'Samalakin. How can we possibly ascertain that one sefer will provide all the answers to all the questions that every person who's studying Tanya needs to hear, to them individually in a way that works for them, and not just answer their questions. Mergoya lenafshay, provide medicine, healing, tranquility for their souls. One sefer for everybody. How is that possible? This is the question of Akdabas HaMalakit. Be'ezus Hashem. We'll continue next week. Thank you for being here.